Parents, what spooky past life memory did your kid utter?
When my daughter was 3 and starting to talk clearer was talking to someone. And concerned, I walked into the bedroom, and no one was there. Initially, I thought it was her playing with her toys. Days later the same scenario, but this time I asked who she was talking to, and she replied, "Your grandma." I thought she meant my mom who had recently passed, so I showed a pic of her and asked, "Is this her?" "No, your grandma," was the reply. I found a picture of my grandma, and she, with a big smile, said, "Yes, her." I was shocked since I don't have pictures of my grandma displayed, and she died 1991, and my daughter, born 2015.
Holy moly.
Spooky. I was the child in this case. I don't remember any of this, but when I was 4 we traveled to Ireland to visit my dad's grandparents. We were walking through a shopping area when I started yelling about wanting to see the train and ran into a shop. My parents ran in after me as I was going nuts about some train. There was no train, it was a clothing store. The woman working there asked my parents what I was doing as I was just running around frantically. I finally yelled, "The train." I had found, in the back of the store, a framed newspaper clipping from the 1940s of the front window of this shop when it was a toy store and there was a big model train scene set up.
In 2006, my best friend Nick was killed in Iraq. We used to wrestle and fight until one of us submitted. These sessions would start randomly, and always be initiated by showing your fangs. This involved pointing your pointer and middle finger down in front of your mouth while growling at the other person. A couple of weeks after his death, some family from the other side of the country that we only see every 5 years or so was visiting. My cousin's son, who was about 5, and who I never met prior to this visit, comes over. He gives me the fangs and smiles. I asked him, "Where did you learn that?" He says, "Your friend says hi," and runs away. I went to my room and cried for a bit.
I believe it 100%, but I just wonder how that's possible. Seems like there's so much we're missing or blind to or just don't know. Thanks for sharing.
This reminds me of an encounter with one painter who used to work on same sites as I did, and we used to argue and criticize each other's quality of work for a joke. And we were all good. One day the dude was extremely silent and distant and didn't answer to my greetings when I got there or to my questions, and I was like, "All right, weird," and kept doing my job in silence while he was painting walls just next to me. I took a small break, and when I come back he was just finished painting this one room and walks past me and greets me in the exact same tone and using the exactly same words as my dead grandpa used to say to me every morning when we came to eat breakfast while visiting our grandparents. I just fucking stood there in shock and was not able to say anything. He then comes back after taking a small break, I guess, and acts normal again like the earlier morning silence never happened. What makes it notable is that he misspelled my name as did my grandpa and used the same weird phrase that he did always. This never happened again, and he never misspelled my name since that. It bugs me out to this day.
Just got goosebumps as I read your stories. Did your cousin's son explain further about that exact moment?
The author of the post replied,
"No. After I collected myself, I told my cousin. My other cousin said he did something similar to her. Very strange."
Children can often see deceased people because they are just more open to these things, and they unlearn it when they grow up. A friend of mine used to see spirits as a child, but it scared her and she blocked them out.
The author of the post replied,
"I believe this after my experience. I wish there was a way to test it."
Did your cousin somehow know Nick? Did you talk about this with him after? Also, sorry for your loss.
The author of the post replied,
No, it was literally the first time I met him. There are no pictures of us showing fangs that I know of, so it's not like he could have seen it that way.
That's actually beautiful. Made me tear up for some reason. Thanks for sharing.
That's crazy, but I've had my share of strange events. My family heard our long-dead dog barking in the house, and I heard her running around at night. That honestly, I think science is overlooking something somewhere.
While I believe you 100%, are you sure your cousin have never witnessed it and later described it to her partner in the presence of a little fella who really just wanted to be nice?
The author of the post replied,
No, I had not seen that cousin in my hometown since I met Nick. Truly a strange thing.
But that fact certainly it's getting stranger. I wish I had some experiences like that. My life has been so ridiculously mundane and secular. It's boring. Not that I wish any of my loved ones to perish, though.
So many damn made-up stories here.
The author of the post replied,
Man, I thought that way until it happened to me. I believe I saw a ghost once. I didn't believe until I saw it. Same with this experience. I am a science-minded person. I feel this is just something we don't understand yet.
Not exactly the same thing, but my 5-year-old daughter has been saying things like, when I look in mirrors there are a lot of people in here. And, why were so many people in my room last night? For like 2 years. Update, it had been a while since she said anything like the above, but yesterday at dinner she turned around and looked behind her. Then said, sometimes I hear voices behind me, but when I look back, no one is there.
Not a mum, but I was a nanny for many years. This is going to be long and I apologize in advance. One of my little ones, 2 years old and incredibly smart child, way ahead developmentally in almost every way. He used to like to tell me things while we got him ready for bed. It was almost always these weird stories which would always start with, when I was an old lady. And they were always very specific little day in the life of type things which I quickly realized went beyond the life experience and typical vocabulary of a 2 years old. Over a few months he kept adding very consistently to this story. He would also sometimes play as this old lady, with a cloth over his head and walking slowly as if his back pained him. Grocery shopping or playing with his sister's dolls as if they were his grandchildren was his favorite when he did this. He added some specific details like, how many children she had, 4 daughters and a son, and how many grandchildren. Her husband had died in his 50s, same age as one of his uncles, from a lung disease. One of her daughters had died in their 30s in a car accident, leaving 2 children who she took in with the help of another daughter. She had a bad back and pain in her feet. One of her daughters would rub her feet to help with the pain. All but one of her children was married. The unmarried daughter lived with her and she worried she would never marry. She remembered dying. She had been crossing a street and hit by a car. She described how people stood around her, where it hurt, how someone eventually lifted her into a car, no ambulances, and took her to hospital where she died. I was not his only nanny, and he was consistent with these stories. Us nannies would get together and swap stories and I would write him down because I had been fascinated with phenomena like past lives before this and wanted to see where it all went. He also described the house and neighborhood they lived in. This is especially interesting as this kid came from a super wealthy family and had never even seen the kind of housing or poverty he was describing. He also talked about living by the seaside. Months into this unfolding, we visited a seaside city on the other side of the country. One day a family member there was having a birthday party, so we piled in the van to drive over, and our driver got lost. This is pre-Google Maps and smartphone times. We ended up driving through this extremely poor neighborhood and suddenly my little boy started shouting and screaming and insisted we turn down a couple of specific streets. He started pointing out the window and telling us things he was recognizing from when I was an old lady. It matched to what he'd previously described in general and we were all so interested we let him direct us where to go as we were already going to be late for the party anyway. He accurately described what we would see round the next turn several times but got extremely confused and upset when he got to where her house was because it was now a store. The driver leaned out the window and asked a nearby old person what had been there before the store and was told, houses. We never went back there or were able to get any additional verification. Totally understandably, his parents were concerned about this storytelling and how vivid and strange it was. So after this dramatic incident, we made an active effort to redirect him to other stories and play types. As he approached 3, he started telling less and less of these stories, and they got less and less specific. By about 3.5, he couldn't even remember telling us stories about being an old lady. He thought we were joking with him. To this day, over 25 years later, I can't explain it really. Edit. Thank you kindly for the updates and awards. I'm so moved, really. I didn't think anyone would read this because I was late to this topic and I typed too much lol. I remembered some additional stuff replying to someone in the comments, so I thought I'd copy it here and add a little more. I wish I still had the notebook I was writing things down in so I could give more specific details. It's a long time ago, so I only remember the bigger highlights of it. I should mention that this did not happen in a Western country and he was a super protected and privileged kid. He didn't even meet a child outside of his direct family till he was 3, when he started a very exclusive kindergarten after I spent several months begging his parents. He rarely watched TV, and when he did, it was highly curated, pretty much just Barney. Not even Disney movies. So there wasn't really a lot of exposure to background media he could have picked this stuff up from. And us nannies didn't talk about most of the stuff he would come out with, and none of us were originally from that country either. So the super specific cultural details he would come out with would baffle us. One of them was when he would play, he'd put a cloth over his head and dance in an extremely specific way. His auntie was visiting one day and saw him do it and fell about laughing. She said he was dancing like an old woman at a wedding. Like, specifically a cultural dance traditionally done by mothers and grandmothers at weddings. There were more specific odd little validations that happened as well. Also, we were specifically instructed not to encourage this play. In that culture, any non-conforming behavior is not well received, so there was fear this was indication of him being other than normal. I say that in quotes because personally I believe there is no fixed normal. Everyone is valid just the way they are. So we were not leading him on and playing into this scenario he was telling us about. We would actually try and redirect him away from it.
What do you think?
From this story, I wonder if that's why some people identify as the opposite gender they're born with. Since this is a boy that seemingly experienced being female before, this thread is both extremely fascinating and creepy. And by reading further in this thread, I now wonder if talents could be explained this way as well. Perfected skills from past lives being perceived as the child having certain gifts.
Most of the people described also haven't really finished their lives, so they kinda hold on to the memory of their past lives. I don't know if that makes sense, but I haven't read a single story where the person died peacefully.
I read an interesting book on reincarnation. One theory of the author was that reincarnated people could remember traumatic deaths, and oftentimes he could find a mark on the child's body that aligned with the death they'd been describing in a past life. He described numerous incidents of this. Very odd.
What's the book?
Old Souls, Tom Schroeder.
I tentatively believe in reincarnation. It goes against my logical reality. But I do think reading stories like this and having my own vivid dreams of a possibly past life, if reincarnation is real, I absolutely died during a bombing during a war in my past life, been having vivid dreams about it since before I probably know what war and bombs were, has colored my view on gender, and my eventual realization in high school that I just don't identify with a binary gender. I keep thinking about if I was ever reborn as the opposite sex, would that make my gender identity change? Stay the same? The body just seems so fleeting. I respect that other people identify as a man or a woman, but to me personally it's about as logical as identifying as blonde or brunette. Which is not saying you can't identify as a blonde or brunette. After all, hair dye exists. Live your best life. It just doesn't make sense to me personally. So, I just don't identify as a man or a woman.
Not me, but a friend's little sister. The whole family was out for dinner at a restaurant in a skiing village which they recently bought a cottage near. My friend's little sister, as soon as they walked in, said, "I know this place." My mother and I used to paint here. To which her mother replied, "We've never been here before." "What do you mean?" she replied with, "No. My mother from before. We used to paint here all the time." The family was obviously a little freaked out but didn't think much of it as she was pretty young and they figured just messing around. Later on though, when talking to the waitress, the little girl again adamantly mentioned how she used to paint there, and the waitress revealed that it in fact was an art studio for many years in the 1900s but had been converted sometime in the early 2000s into a restaurant. Needless to say, the entire table, waitress included, got goosebumps and were at a loss for words.
I don't know how old I was, but when I was young I was in the car with my parents and I said something like, "Oh, I used to live there," while pointing at a house we were driving past. Turns out it was my great-great-grandmother's house.
One of my preschool students, "What do you want to do when you're a kid again?" Me, "Well, grown-ups don't become kids again. We grow up and stay grown-ups." Her, "Well, I remember when I was a grown-up and I drove a car. And now I'm a kid again."
Someone taught my nephew from when he was 4, that whenever an older person said they didn't believe in reincarnation, that he should say, "It's okay. I didn't believe it either when I was your age."
I only have 2 vivid memories of my preschool years. I remember thinking of specific people that weren't here at the time, but I've no idea who they are from my memories. I feel like there's so much more to the memory that's just out of reach. The first one I would have been just learning to talk, so maybe 18 to 24 months. I was standing in our gravel driveway on a hot day with my mom. I asked her for some wah-wah. She told me to say, "Water." I asked for wah-wah again, but she told me, "If you want a drink, you must say water." I distinctly remember the entire exchange and thinking, "You know what I want. Why are you doing this?" They said this one was going to be easy. The next time would have been a year or 2 later. My older sister excitedly told me, "Now you get to learn to read." And again, I distinctly remember thinking, "No. They promised this time would be easy. This isn't easy. What is all this?" I remember the feeling of disappointment from each of these moments. I love learning now, but I'm certain when I die, I'll be having a chat with someone about the meaning of easy.
My younger sister, when she was 3, started talking to my mom about when I was a big girl and you were a little girl. She said she went to my parents' wedding. She described her old self physically, and my mom says that sounded like my mom's grandmother Grace. My sister also talked about the green house she used to live in at the end of a dirt road and the fact that her mother, my mom's great-grandmother Matilda, died from a snake bite while they lived there. She described the snake as pretty, and with the full description my mom thinks she was describing a copperhead. Now we lived in northern Nebraska, no copperheads, and Matilda died in southeast Oklahoma, Copperhead region. My sister said she killed the snake with a hoe. These discussions always took place at bedtime. One day, we were putting in the garden and my dad was sitting down and sharpening the hoe with a file, and my sister told him he was doing it wrong. He told her to show him how to do it. She put her hands on his and placed them in the correct position, and later he said that she was right, he was doing it wrong. For those of you interested in timelines, this would be in 1980, my mother's grandmother Grace died in 1968, and her great-grandmother Matilda died in 1902. Also, we don't know if snakebite was the cause of death for her great-grandmother Matilda. I was 15 at the time these little nightly discussions were going on, so I remember them fairly well. She probably told these things on and off for about 6 months, and by 4 she would say, "I'm tired of talking about it." I am not a great writer, so I hope this is not too confusing.
I had a brother pass away from brain cancer. At the time we had a cat who was a calico and just sort of knew he was battling something. She was really mean to most people, but with him she was gentle. He would grab her paws and she would just let it happen. Well, about 3 years after he passed, my parents had another child. Another boy. He was about 3 when he told my parents about the white, brown and black cat that used to let him grab her paws. She had died about a year before he was born.
Apparently when I was really little, around 3 or so, I told my mom that this was my last time here, that I wasn't going to come back.
2019 I was pregnant but lost the baby at 9 weeks. Had to have it surgically removed. We never told our son, who was 2 at the time. A couple of weeks after the loss, we were in the car and out of nowhere he says, "Well, my brother is in the trash can now." I don't remember what we talked about. I tried to ask him more about it, but he quickly changed subjects. I cried a lot, to say the least. As I said, no one ever told him anything.
My mom said when I was pretty young she was driving me to daycare before work and I told her, "You should have called Irma last night before she died." This was an old coworker she loved. Turns out Irma had died that night.
When my nephew was about 3 or 4, my sister said he was throwing a tantrum in the car while he was in his car seat and he yelled at her randomly,
"I waited 100 years to be born."
When I was very young and still unable to string sentences together, my mom and I were sitting at the dining room table. She was crying and I comforted my mother by telling her without any babbling or hesitation, "It's okay, I used to be your great-grandmother, I'll take care of you." I have no memory of this and my mom said I went back to my baby-like talk immediately after. She stopped crying, probably because it scared the shit out of her.
So this was a few years ago when Lil Dude was 5. He's sitting at the table with us, eating a bowl of Cocoa Pops, when he looks up and says, "There was a ghost floating over my bed last night." Surprised, I asked him, "Did it do anything? Or say anything?" Little guy looks me dead in the eye and tells me, "The ghost told me that Kiss used to rock."
That's the kind of ghost I want to be. Educational.
I'm all about those modern encounters. No more Victorian kids in nightwear, please. I want a 70s rocker.
We've come to the end of another spooky tale. Oh, the ambiguities of life. Some things just won't be explained in this lifetime. Leave a spooky comment. Let's hear your stories or theories. We hate to see you go. Subscribe and remember, the door is always open and someone is always home.